Hear me, O you who walk in the shadow of uncertainty, you whose heart wavers like a reed in the wind. For I will speak to you of a man who dared to ask the Almighty for proof not once, but twice. A man who stood at the edge of an impossible battle, whose knees trembled beneath him, even as the Spirit of the Lord clothed him like armor. A man whose name means feller of trees, for he would cut down the mightiest armies of the ancient world with nothing but 300 men, clay jars, and the torchlight of heaven. His name was Gideon, son of Joash of the tribe of Manasseh. And if you have ever stood at the crossroads of a great calling, if you have ever heard the voice of God whisper your name in the silence of the night and thought to yourself, "Surely it cannot be me. Surely he has mistaken me for someone else," then this story is yours. Listen closely, for what happened in the threshing floor of Ophrah, in the cool of the night, with a fleece of wool and the dew of heaven, will shake something loose in your soul. This is not merely a story of a judge of ancient Israel. This is the story of every man, every woman, every trembling heart that has ever said to God, "Show me, just show me one more time." Do not turn away. What the Lord revealed to Gideon in the silence of 2 nights will speak directly into whatever battle you are facing right now.
But before we press further into the sacred narrative, before we kneel beside Gideon on that threshing floor and witness what dew and fleece and the faithfulness of God can accomplish, I must pause and speak to you plainly. If the stories of the ancient scriptures stir something deep within you, if the thunder of the Old Testament fills you with holy wonder, then this is a channel where you belong. Every week we go deep into the Word, not skimming the surface of the text, but diving into the ancient world, into the culture, the language, the fire, and the fear of those who walked with the living God. Click the subscribe button now. Ring that bell, because the next time we open these sacred pages, you will want to be here. The journey through the book of Judges has only just begun, and what lies ahead will leave you breathless. Now, let us return to the field. Let us return to the darkness before the dawn, when Gideon spread his fleece upon the threshing floor and whispered his trembling prayer into the night sky of Canaan. To understand Gideon, you must first understand the land into which he was born. For 7 long years, 7 years that felt like 70, the children of Israel had suffered. The Midianites, a vast and ferocious confederacy of desert peoples, swept through the land of Canaan every harvest season like a plague of locusts. The text of Judges 6 tells us that they came in numbers like grasshoppers, that their camels were without number, as the sand which is by the seashore for multitude. They devoured the crops, they slaughtered the livestock, they left nothing, not sheep, nor ox, nor donkey, to sustain the people. Israel starved, Israel hid. The children of the covenant, those people who had crossed the Red Sea, those descendants of men who had seen the plagues of Egypt and the pillar of fire in the wilderness, these very people had taken to living in dens in the mountains, in caves and strongholds carved from rock, cowering like animals before the Midianite sword. It was a humiliation almost without words. And the reason for this humiliation? The sacred text does not hide it. The children of Israel had done evil in the sight of the Lord. They had abandoned the God of their fathers. They had bowed their knees to the gods of the Amorites, to Baal, the storm deity, to Asherah, the goddess of the groves. They had forgotten the one who parted waters and rained bread from heaven, and they had given their worship to carved wood and molten metal. So the Lord gave them over, not in cruelty, but in the painful discipline of love. For a father who watches his child run toward a fire does not always stop the burning. Sometimes he allows the heat to teach what words could not. And when Israel had been scorched enough, when 7 years of misery had broken their pride and emptied their storehouses, they cried out. And God heard them, as he always hears, as he has always heard. Now, in the city of Ophrah, in the land of the Abiezrites, there lived a young man named Gideon, and he was doing something strange for the times. He was threshing wheat, not in the open field where the wind could carry the chaff away as was proper, but in a winepress, a pit, a hollow in the earth where grapes were crushed for wine. Why would a man thresh wheat in a winepress? Because he was hiding. Because if the Midianites saw wheat being threshed in the open, they would come. They always came, and they would take it all. So Gideon crouched in a pit, doing the work of a farmer in the darkness, trying to salvage enough grain for his family to survive another week. And it was here, in this pit, in this hiding place, in this moment of cowering fear, that the angel of the Lord appeared to him. "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior," said the angel. Consider that greeting for a moment. This is a man hiding in a hole, sweating with fear, trying not to be seen, and the messenger of heaven calls him a mighty warrior. There is something almost startling about it, almost humorous if the stakes were not so desperately high. The Lord did not see what Gideon was. He saw what Gideon was about to become. But Gideon's response is one of the most honest things ever recorded in Scripture. He did not rise up with his fist in the air. He did not shout, "Hallelujah!" He looked at the messenger and said, in plain, unvarnished grief, "Please, my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his miracles that our fathers told us about, saying, 'Did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian." There is a lifetime of theology packed into those words. Gideon was not a cynic. He was not a man who disbelieved in God. He was a man who believed deeply, but who could not reconcile the God of the Exodus with the God of this present nightmare. He had heard the stories at his father's knee. He knew about the parted sea, the manna, the walls of Jericho that fell to a trumpet blast. And yet here he stood, in a pit, hiding from nomadic raiders. The Lord did not answer his theological question directly. Instead, he said simply, "Go in this might of yours and save Israel from the hand of Midian. Do not I send you?" And Gideon, in the most human response imaginable, said, "Please, Lord, how can I save Israel? Behold, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house." Least in his father's house, the lowest, the smallest, the most overlooked. This is the man God chose to break the back of a coalition army that stretched to the horizon. God never does things the way we expect.
Before the fleece, before the great test of the wool and the dew, there was a first sign. Gideon ran inside his house and prepared his sacrifice, a young goat, unleavened bread made from an ephah of flour. He brought the meat in a basket and the broth in a pot, and he laid them before the angel under the oak tree of Ophrah. The angel of the Lord touched the meat and the bread with the tip of his staff,
and fire leaped from the rock and consumed them entirely. And then the angel was gone. And Gideon understood. He had been speaking with God himself. He cried out, "Alas, O Lord God, for now I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face." And he was terrified, as any mortal man would be terrified who glimpsed the burning reality of the divine. But the Lord reassured him, "Peace be to you. Do not fear. You shall not die." So Gideon built an altar there and called it Jehovah Shalom, the Lord is peace. And that night, God commanded him to pull down the altar of Baal that stood in his father's courtyard, to cut down the Asherah pole beside it, and to build a proper altar to the Lord in its place, which Gideon did, but in the middle of the night, secretly, because he feared his father's household and the men of the city. Even in his obedience, there was fear. Even in his courage, there was caution. This is the texture of a real human being, not a marble statue of faith. Gideon moved forward, but he moved forward trembling, and the Lord honored him anyway. Then the Midianites, the Amalekites, and the sons of the east gathered together for their annual invasion of Israel. They crossed the Jordan and camped in the valley of Jezreel, a vast, dark mass of armed men and camels and chariots, spreading across the valley floor like a shadow over the land. And then it happened, one of the most extraordinary statements in all of Judges. The text says, "But the Spirit of the Lord clothed Gideon." The Hebrew word used here is labesh, to clothe, to put on as a garment. The Spirit of the Almighty wrapped himself around this frightened young farmer as though putting on a coat of armor. Gideon did not summon courage from within himself. He could not. He had none deep enough for this task. The Spirit came upon him from outside, from above, from beyond, and the man who had been hiding in a winepress blew a trumpet and called Israel to war. 22,000 men came to him, then 32,000. The army grew. And yet, for reasons we will come to, God would strip it down to just 300. But first, before the stripping, before the army was assembled, before the torches and the clay jars, before the great victory cry of the sword of the Lord and of Gideon, there was a night of dew and a fleece of wool. We find the account of the fleece in Judges 6:36 through 40. Let us read it slowly as it deserves. Then Gideon said to God, "If you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said, behold, I am laying a fleece of wool on the threshing floor. If there is dew on the fleece alone, and it is dry on all the ground, then I shall know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said." Now, there has been much debate across the centuries about this prayer. Was it faith? Was it doubt? Was it wrong of Gideon to ask for a sign after God had already spoken so clearly? Here is what I believe the text tells us. Gideon was not testing God the way a skeptic tests a hypothesis. He was not demanding proof because he disbelieved. Rather, he was a man upon whose shoulders an impossible weight had been placed, the salvation of a nation, the leadership of an army against an overwhelming enemy, and he was, in the deepest sense, afraid of getting it wrong. Think of what failure would have meant. Not just defeat, though defeat would have been devastating enough, but the deaths of thousands of men who followed him, the continued subjugation of Israel, the shame, the blood. He needed to know, not because he doubted God's existence, but because he needed absolute certainty that he had heard God correctly before he led men to their deaths. And so he laid the fleece. That night, in the silence of the valley, while the campfires of Midian glittered in the darkness below, dew fell upon the land of Canaan. It fell on the rocks, on the trees, on the soil,
on the tents and the animals and the sleeping faces of thousands of men, but not on the ground around the fleece. The next morning, Gideon rose early, before the sun had fully climbed the sky, and he went to the threshing floor. He reached out his hand and touched the fleece. It was soaked. Wrung out, the text says he squeezed a whole bowl full of water from it, and the ground around it was perfectly dry. The Lord had answered.
And yet, Gideon asked again. This is the part of the story that most unsettles people. The Lord had just performed a miracle. The sign was unambiguous, and still Gideon came back with another request. Then Gideon said to God, "Do not let your anger burn against me. Let me speak just once more. Please let me test just once more with the fleece. Please let it be dry on the fleece only, and on all the ground let there be dew." Notice how he begins. "Do not let your anger burn against me." He knew what he was doing was bold, perhaps even audacious. He was aware that he was pushing the limits of the exchange, and yet he pressed forward anyway because the stakes were too high for anything less than absolute certainty. The second test was, in some ways, more difficult than the first. Wool naturally retains moisture. It would not be terribly remarkable, in a world before science, to imagine that wool might absorb dew while surrounding earth remained drier, but to have the fleece completely dry while the ground around it was soaked with dew, that required a precise, deliberate act of divine intervention, moisture avoiding only this specific object, settling on everything else in the field. That night, God did it again. When Gideon rose in the morning, the ground was heavy with dew, glistening, dripping, the grass bowed under its weight, and the fleece was completely dry, not a single drop. Gideon now had his answer, twice, from heaven itself. There would be no more delays. The Lord of hosts had confirmed his word. The warrior of Manasseh took up his trumpet and prepared for war. Now, beloved, let us sit with this for a moment, because the story of Gideon's fleece has been used in many ways across the centuries of the church, some of them helpful, some of them less so. There are those who teach that believers should never ask God for signs, that to do so is a lack of faith, a spiritual immaturity, a demand that reduces the Almighty to a performer of parlor tricks. And there is wisdom in that caution. The New Testament warns against a wicked and adulterous generation that seeks signs, and Jesus himself declined to satisfy the curiosity of those who demanded miracles simply to see them. But Gideon was not seeking entertainment. He was not seeking proof of God's existence. He already believed. He had already spoken face to face with the angel of the Lord and seen fire leap from a rock. He was seeking confirmation of a specific calling, a calling that would cost thousands of lives if he heard it wrong. And God, in his extraordinary patience, gave it to him. What the fleece teaches us, first and foremost, is this: God is not offended by our fear. He is not frustrated when we need reassurance. He is not angered when a trembling human being, overwhelmed by the weight of a divine assignment, falls on his face and says, "Please, show me one more time." The same God who parted the Red Sea, who rained down bread from heaven, who spoke from the burning bush, this God bent down and soaked a piece of wool with dew while the field around it stayed dry. Not because he had to prove anything, but because Gideon needed it, because his servant was afraid, because love makes room for trembling. The fleece also teaches us something profound about the nature of divine calling.
God does not always choose the strong. He does not always summon the experienced, the qualified, the courageous, the prepared. He called a man who was hiding in a winepress. He called a man from the weakest clan of a minor tribe. He called a man who needed 2 supernatural signs before he could take 1 step forward. And with that man, that specific, frightened, faith-struggling man, he broke the back of an army as vast as the sands of the sea. If you have felt unqualified for what God is calling you to do, Gideon's story is written for you. If you have asked God, "Are you sure? Are you really sure it's me?" Gideon's story is written for you. If you have knelt in the darkness, alone, and laid out your own kind of fleece, a prayer, a sign, a desperate seeking, and wondered whether God would answer a person like you, know this: He answered Gideon twice, and He can answer you.
The story does not end with the fleece. The confirmation of the calling was only the beginning. After the fleece, God did something that defied all human military strategy. He told Gideon that his army of 32,000 men was too large to fight an enemy described as being without number. God's reasoning was clear. If Israel won with 32,000 soldiers, the people would take the credit. They would boast that their own strength had delivered them. So God began to shrink the army. First, He sent home everyone who was afraid. 22,000 men left. 10,000 remained. Still too many, God said. So He had Gideon take them to the water and observe how they drank. Most got down on their knees and put their faces to the stream, but 300 men cupped the water in their hands and lapped it, watching, alert, heads up. These 300 God kept. Everyone else went home. 300 against a coalition host that filled the valley like grasshoppers. And yet, they won. With clay jars and torches and trumpets and a battle cry, they sent the armies of Midian into a panicked rout. The enemies turned their swords on each other in the darkness and fled, and Israel pursued them to the river. Not by might, not by military strength, by the hand of the Lord, working through the most unlikely instruments He could have chosen. A man who once hid in a winepress, leading 300 men who drank from their palms. The fleece was not a footnote in this story. It was the foundation. Before Gideon could lead 300 men against 100,000, he needed to know, with absolute certainty, beyond any shadow of wavering doubt, that the God of Israel was with him. The fleece gave him that certainty, and from that certainty came the courage to do the impossible. Faith that has been tested, faith that has wrestled with doubt and come through the other side with evidence in its hands, is not weaker for its wrestling, it is stronger. Gideon's faith after the fleece was not the blind faith of a man who had never questioned. It was the settled, confirmed, twice-proven faith of a man who had asked and received, who had sought and found, who had knocked and had the door opened to him. That kind of faith does not flinch when the enemy spreads across the valley like a sea. That kind of faith blows a trumpet in the darkness and watches heaven move.
Millennia have passed since Gideon knelt in the field of Ophrah. The threshing floor where he laid his fleece has long since returned to dust. The oak tree where he spoke with the angel of the Lord has grown and fallen and grown again in some form we cannot see. The valley where the armies of Midian trembled and fled is known by different names now, traversed by different roads, home to different people. And yet the story lives. It lives because the God who answered Gideon has not changed. The one who soaked a fleece with dew while the field stayed dry, who reversed the moisture on the second night to satisfy the doubts of a trembling farmer. That God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. His patience has not diminished. His willingness to meet his people in their fear has not grown cold. Every generation has its Gideons. Every generation has its men and women who stand at the edge of an impossible calling, who hear the whisper of the divine and shrink back, who lay their own kind of fleece before the Lord in the darkness of a sleepless night. If this is really you, if this is really what you're asking of me, please let me see it clearly. And the Lord, in his faithfulness, answers. Not always in the way we expect, not always with wet wool and dry ground, but in the quiet confirmation of a scripture that speaks directly to your situation, in the counsel of a trusted voice who says the same thing the Spirit has already whispered, in the opening of a door that was locked the day before, in the persistence of a calling that will not go quiet no matter how many times you tell it to. He answers. So, if you are standing today where Gideon stood, afraid, uncertain, feeling utterly unqualified for what has been placed before you, take heart from the story of the fleece. Take heart from a man who hid in a winepress and became a deliverer of nations. Take heart from a God who is patient enough to soak wool twice in 2 different configurations to convince one frightened human being that he means what he says. You are not too small. You are not too weak. You are not too doubting. Gideon was all of these things, and the Lord called him a mighty warrior before he had won a single battle. The dew of heaven still falls. The faithfulness of God still holds. The calling placed on your life by the living God is not a mistake. Rise up. The battle before you is not yours. It belongs to the Lord, and with him 300 is always enough.
If the story of Gideon has stirred something within you today, if you felt the weight of those words settle on your spirit like dew on a wool fleece, then there is more waiting for you right here on this channel. Click on the video appearing on your screen right now to continue the journey through the book of Judges, where warriors rise, where angels appear, where God does his greatest work through the most unexpected hands. And if you have not yet subscribed, do it now, because we go deep into these ancient stories every single week. We read the texts the way they were meant to be read, slowly, reverently, and with a hunger to understand not just what happened, but why it matters to you today. The God of Gideon is still speaking. The question is whether we are listening. Until next time, may the dew of heaven rest upon you, and may the Lord of hosts go before you in every battle you face.